Wyoming Territory, September 1887. The wind rolled down from the Wind River Range like a living thing, sharp with the promise of snow. Storm clouds blackened the sky, rumbling low like distant drums. Zane Northwood tugged his duster tighter around his shoulders, boots heavy with mud as he urged his gelding forward. The cattle had scattered sometime during the night, spooked by wolves or lightning, and he couldn't bring himself to let them wander far. He rode with his head low, brim of his hat dripping rain, every hoof step squelching through sodden earth. He should have stayed in the cabin when the clouds first built above the ridgeline, but duty and solitude had shaped him into a man who didn't turn back. Lightning split the sky in jagged white, and thunder cracked behind it, loud enough to rattle ribs. Then, a sound, faint, human. He pulled hard on the reins. The gelding reared slightly, snorting in protest as the mud sucked at its hooves. Zane turned in the saddle, heart thudding harder than the thunder overhead. There it was again, a cry, barely a whisper beneath the wind and rain, but unmistakably from someone in pain. He swung down from the saddle, boots sinking deep, and pushed through the undergrowth along the trail's edge. Another flash of lightning lit the slope. There, a figure slumped near a fallen pine, soaked to the skin. A bonnet clung to her hair, her body trembling with cold. Zane didn't hesitate. He dropped to one knee beside her. "Ma'am," he said, voice steady. "Can you hear me?" She flinched, eyes wide and wild with fear. "Do not touch me," she whispered. "I won't hurt you," he said, keeping his tone low, calm. "But you'll freeze out here." She said nothing, only shivered violently. Rain streamed down her cheeks, blending with tears. Zane shrugged off his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. The fabric drooped over her frame. She was far too light. Without waiting for permission, he lifted her into his arms. She didn't fight him, just leaned slightly into his chest, eyes fluttering closed. The horse balked as he mounted, but settled once Zane was astride, holding the woman close. She was quiet, not limp but fragile, like something that had already broken once and was afraid to break again. The cabin was less than a mile away. Still, it felt like forever in the storm. The wind roared through the pines, slapping at his back. But Zane rode with purpose, each stride carving through the storm. She didn't speak again, didn't need to. He heard enough in that cry to carry her all the way home. The wind howled as Zane kicked the cabin door open with his boot and carried her inside. The room, dim and cold, smelled of smoke and pine sap. He moved quickly, laying her down on the cot near the hearth, then struck a match and lit the lantern. A warm glow spilled across the space, casting long shadows over the wooden walls. "Fire first," he muttered to himself, crouching beside the hearth to stack kindling. She lay still, curled under his coat, face pale beneath damp strands of hair. When the flame caught and the fire came to life, she stirred slightly, eyes opening just enough to find the light. "I didn't know where else to go," she said, voice small, trembling. "You don't have to explain," Zane answered without turning. "Let's get you warm." He stripped off his wet shirt and threw it over the chair to dry, then pulled a wool blanket from the chest. When he handed it to her, she hesitated, then took it slowly and wrapped it around herself with shaking hands. "I'm Zane Northwood," he said, pouring a tin cup of water and offering it to her. "You got a name?" She stared at the fire for a moment, silent, then nodded faintly. "Delia Monroe. Where were you headed?" "Delia." She looked down into the cup. "Nowhere. I was running." Zane nodded slowly, then sat across from her, not too close. The fire warmed the air between them, and for the first time since he found her, she stopped shivering. Her fingers tightened around the cup as she looked into it, like it might hold something more than just water. "My husband died last winter. she said. Then the ranch hands left. The bank came, said the land wasn't mine. I had nowhere left, so I walked. The storm caught me near the ridge. Zane watched her carefully. Her voice didn't waver, but there were lines of grief on her face that didn't belong to someone so young. You said was, he murmured, means you're alone now. Delia nodded, eyes still on the fire. I have no one. Zane leaned back, his heart tugging in a way he hadn't felt in years. You do now. She glanced at him, confusion flickering through her tired gaze. Why would you say that? He shrugged. Because I'm not the kind who leaves someone crying in the mud. She looked away again, but her lip trembled this time. I wasn't crying for help, she whispered. I was just crying. Zane didn't answer. Instead, he stood and moved to the stove. You hungry? He asked over his shoulder. She nodded. He cooked beans and cornbread. The scent filling the room as the storm howled against the roof. They ate in quiet, the fire crackling between them. Afterward, Delia sat curled in his coat, staring into the flames. Zane rolled out a pallet across the room from her. The cabin was small, but he left enough space to let her breathe. He banked the fire low and lay down, arms folded beneath his head. Why are you up here alone? She asked softly. He kept his eyes closed. Used to be a ranch foreman near Laramie. Lost my wife in childbirth, 3 winters back. Couldn't stay after that. The wind screamed outside, but inside, the quiet felt warm. I'm sorry, Delia whispered. He nodded once. Me too. She was quiet for a long time. He thought she had fallen asleep until her voice floated across the dark. Thank you for stopping. Zane opened his eyes, watching the golden flicker of firelight on the ceiling. I heard you cry, he said. That's all. But it was more than that. Neither of them said another word that night, but something had shifted. Something unspoken, like the fire between them. Not burning, just warm. Morning broke slow and pale, mist clinging low to the hills like breath that hadn't yet exhaled. Zane stepped outside before first light, the chill biting at his skin as he stacked logs by the woodpile. The storm had passed, but the memory of it still clung to the cabin walls. When he returned, Delia was standing barefoot near the stove, hair half braided, sleeves rolled past her elbows. She hadn't asked for anything. She had simply stirred the embers back to life and warmed the skillet like she had always belonged there. You didn't have to do that, he said, setting the wood down. I know, she replied, without looking up. But I used your blanket. Seemed fair. Zane poured water into the basin and washed his hands, glancing at her as she flipped bacon in the pan. You always settle debts that fast. I try, she said, but I've got more owing than I can ever pay off. She moved with the ease of someone who had done this before, but her shoulders stayed tight, like she was waiting for something to snap. You planning to keep running? He asked. She turned, scraped the bacon onto 2 tin plates. There's nowhere left to run. He took a plate, sat by the window, steam rising from the food between them. That's not the same as wanting to stay. She lowered herself into the chair across from him. Her fingers were raw at the knuckles, her gaze distant. I don't know what I want, she said quietly. I only know what I don't. Zane nodded. Sometimes that's the place to start. They ate in silence, the kind that didn't press or pull, just made room. Her eyes drifted toward the saddlebag she'd left near the door. It sagged, worn and heavy. What's in it? He asked. She hesitated. Ledger books. My husband kept records. He believed in order, thought it would protect us. Did it? No. He sipped his coffee slow. You keep them because they matter, or because you don't know what to do without them. Delia's fingers tightened around her fork. Somebody should remember he tried. Zane let that sit in the air, then said, simply, then keep them. After breakfast, she stepped out onto the porch, arms crossed over her chest. The fog was lifting now, revealing the slow rise of land. The quiet hush of the world waking up again. Zane joined her, pulling a dry shirt over his head. "I've got fences down," he said. "Cattle scattered some. I can help." He looked at her, surprised. She added quickly, "I know how." We had hands, but when they left, it was just me. "You ride? Not pretty," she said. "But I stay on." They saddled 2 horses. She mounted without asking for help, skirt hitched above her ankles, boots caked in old trail dust. They rode side by side through the low hills, the storm-washed earth glistening under soft sun. Near the creek, he pointed to a broken rail. She slid down without waiting, lifted the post as he held the crossbeam. She didn't flinch from the weight or the mud. When a calf bawled in the distance, she turned toward the sound with narrowed eyes, already knowing what needed to be done. By late afternoon, 3 rails stood tall again, and 3 calves were back inside the gate. Zane watched her brush the hair from her face. Dirt streaked across her cheek. "You're not afraid of the work," he said. "I was born to it," she replied. "Folks think women can't manage land, but we do, just not loud enough to be noticed." He chuckled. "You're being noticed now." She looked at him, and for the first time, the fear in her gaze gave way to something quieter, warmer. "You don't ask questions like other men." "Maybe I'm not like other men." She didn't answer, but she didn't look away. They returned to the cabin as the sun dipped low behind the hills, casting the sky in a soft amber haze. Delia unsaddled her horse without being asked, hung the bridle with quiet care, then stepped inside without a word by the window. She sat and unbraided her hair, combing through it with her fingers as the firelight flickered across the walls. Zane moved about the cabin with practiced ease, pouring water into the kettle, folding the blanket she had used, checking the fire. "You planning to sleep inside again tonight?" he asked, voice even. Delia didn't turn. "Unless you'd rather I didn't." He stepped a little closer, but not too close. "I'd rather you did." She looked over her shoulder, eyes meeting his. "Then I will." The wind picked up outside, whistling through the trees, but it didn't sound the same. It wasn't a warning anymore. It was a lullaby. Inside, the quiet stretched wide between them, but it wasn't empty. It held something new, something tentative. Trust, maybe, or the beginning of it. The next morning, frost traced the windows like lace, delicate and fading fast. Zane was up before the light, hauling oats to the lean-to. When he returned, Delia was seated at the table, a piece of paper in front of her and a pencil in hand. "Didn't hear you get up," he said. "I couldn't sleep," she murmured, eyes on the page. "Your floor holds every creak like it's telling secrets." He poured water into the basin, glanced over at her drawing. "You writing?" "Trying to remember the layout of our old pasture," she said, tapping the edge of the paper. "I used to walk every fence line with my husband before the frost came. Thought maybe if I drew it out, I could hold on to it longer." Zane didn't respond right away. He filled the kettle, set it on the stove, then sat across from her. "You plan to try for another piece of land?" "I don't know what I'd do with it," she said, "but I don't like the thought of forgetting how it felt to belong somewhere." He leaned back in his chair, considering. "There's land out past the second ridge," he said. "Belongs to no one. If you're willing to fight the rock and the cold for it." "I've fought worse," she replied. He nodded. "Then maybe you'd take a look with me when the sun's higher." She folded the paper and slipped it into her pocket. "I'd like that." After breakfast, they left the cabin on foot, climbing the slope in the slow morning light. The frost softened beneath their boots, and the sun crested the trees with golden warmth. Zane led the way, stopping now and again to point out elk sign or where the ground shifted in spring melt. Delia kept pace beside him, quiet but alert, eyes scanning everything like she was storing it all. At the top of the ridge, she stopped and drew a long breath. Below them stretched a wide hollow, rimmed by pine and lit in gold. A creek cut through the center like a silver ribbon, winding toward the edge of the world. "I didn't expect it to be so open," she said. "Most folks pass it by," Zane replied. "Too much work to clear." She crouched, ran her hand through a patch of wild rye. "It's good earth," she murmured. "Settles different when it's been left alone a while." Zane watched the way her fingers pressed gently into the soil. Land remembers who's kind to it. Delia looked over at him, half smiling. "You sound like you've talked to it yourself." "I've listened," he said. They lingered through midday, walking the edge of the clearing. She asked about windbreaks and water rods. He answered plainly, without boasting, just a man who knew what he'd lived. At the far end of the hollow, they sat on a fallen log and shared a strip of dried venison from his coat pocket. Delia chewed slow, watching a hawk spiral above the treetops. "My mother died when I was 16, she said quietly. "We buried her under the cottonwoods behind the barn. After that, I stopped talking so much." Zane didn't speak. "My husband never minded," she continued. "He liked quiet." She paused. "I don't miss him the way folks expect, but I miss the steadiness. Knowing someone else would rise when I did, sleep when I lay down." Zane shifted, elbows on knees. "Steadiness matters more than folks give it credit for." She looked at him. "I've seen men who talk about promises, and men who just keep them. You think I'm the second kind?" She nodded once. "I don't make many," he said, "but I don't break what few I do." They sat a while longer, the sun warming their backs, the creek whispering below, and somewhere in that quiet, where no vows were spoken and no plans made, something began to root. Not just between them, but in them. By the time they made their way back to the cabin, the sky had begun to pink at the edges, soft and low. Delia gathered pine kindling while Zane checked the horses, his motion slow, thoughtful. When he stepped inside, she was already at the table, sleeves rolled, stirring flour into a bowl. Her hair was tied back with a strip of muslin, and the rhythm of her hands felt like something familiar, something returning. "You sure you want to cook again?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe. "I don't like sitting idle," she said without looking up. "Besides, I make better biscuits than I do conversation." Zane smiled faintly. "We'll test that theory later." As the fire burned low to embers, Delia sat near the hearth, her shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders, legs folded beneath her. Zane sat across from her, mending a tear in his saddlebag. The quiet between them soft as the flicker of flame. She broke it first. "You think we're meant to be alone after we lose someone?" He didn't answer right away. The thread moved through the leather, steady and sure. "I think some people find their way back," he said, "if they're willing to let the hurt be part of the map." She stared into the fire. "And if they're not, then they stay lost longer," he said. "But not always forever." Delia looked over, eyes catching the warm light. "You still believe in a future?" Zane set the needle down. "I believe in today. The rest can grow from that." She lowered her gaze, then slowly lifted it again. "Would it trouble you much if I stayed a while longer?" He met her eyes. "No," he said, quiet and certain. "It wouldn't trouble me one bit." Her shoulders eased just slightly, but enough. And for the first time since she'd stepped through his door, she settled with both feet beneath her, as if trusting the ground not to shift. The days turned slow and steady. The last of the snow melted from the north-facing slopes, and the creek below swelled with meltwater. Tumbling over dark stone, Delia stood at the edge of the field, sleeves pushed high, skirt pinned above the knees. She was marking rows with a stick she'd trimmed herself, eyes locked on the earth with quiet concentration. From the cabin steps, Zane watched her, a sack of seed corn resting against his hip. "You've got a straight line," he called. She glanced over, brushing hair from her brow. "Used to tie string between stakes. Now I trust my eye." He stepped forward, dropped beside her. "Mind if I walk it with you?" She handed him the stick. "Go on then. Let's see if your hand's as steady as your talk." They worked together, rhythm easy now. She marked. He pressed his boot into the soil behind her. The sun rose slow, casting long shadows across the furrows. After a while, she spoke again. "That hollow you showed me. It stays dry through spring." "Mostly." Zane dusted his hands, nodded. "Sometimes a little water near the creek, but it drains fast." Her gaze drifted toward the tree line. "If I built a lean-to there, I'd need pine. I could use the trunks near the east fence." He paused. "That a thought or a plan?" "I don't make plans without thinking first," she said. He stood, brushing dirt from his trousers. "Then we'll see to it. I've got tools enough, and the saw's still sharp." Delia looked up, then down at the line they'd made. "You'd help me with that." Zane nodded. "If you mean to stay, it's no longer just yours to build." She stepped back, gaze sweeping across the field, the ridge, the quiet cabin behind them. "I'd like to make something that doesn't disappear when the weather turns." He reached for the sack and handed it to her. "Then we plant." They dropped seed by hand, one for every few inches, just like his father had taught. By mid-afternoon, the rows were set, and Delia leaned on the hoe, sweat beading on her brow. "You move like you've always belonged to this land," he said. "I don't belong to much," she replied, "but I know how to listen." Later, they knelt by the creek, washing their hands in the rushing water. Delia cupped her palms, letting the cold run through her fingers. Zane sat back, watching the way she moved, capable, quiet, not fragile, just worn. "I never asked," he said, "what you'd have done if I hadn't come along." She let the water fall from her hands. "I'd have walked till my feet gave out, maybe found a tree to sleep under." "You don't talk like someone who gives up easy." "I don't," she said, "but I was close." The wind rustled through the willows behind them. Zane reached down, pulled a pebble from the stream bed, rolled it between thumb and forefinger. "You found something steadier than what you had." Delia turned to him. "I think I found someone who hears quiet things." He looked at her, the words settling deep. "That's not something I ever set out to be." She smiled, soft and true. "It's still what you are." They walked back slowly, boots sinking into soft earth, the sun folding gold across their shoulders inside the cabin. The scent of warm bread drifted through the air. Delia set a loaf on the table, broke it in half, handed him a piece. "You ever think about what comes next?" she asked, not looking at him. "I think about what holds," he said, "what doesn't wash out with a storm." She nodded. "And if something holds, you keep it." She sat across from him, tearing a piece of bread. "Then maybe I'll build that lean-to, and maybe I won't leave it behind come winter." Zane met her eyes. "I'd like that," and for the first time since the storm. She didn't look like someone passing through. She looked like someone returning. The days lengthened, and the wind softened, no longer biting with winter's edge. Delia stood barefoot on the cleared patch near the cabin, dragging a rake through the loose earth. Her skirt hem was dark with dust, and her hands bore the lines of work dry, cracked, strong. Yet on her face was something quiet, not joy, not yet, but steadiness, the kind that comes after the storm passes and the world holds. Zane approached from the tree line, a coil of fence wire slung over his shoulder. "The west gate's holding," he said. "I walked it to the gulch. Delia nodded, adjusting the rake in her grip. "I boiled some willow bark this morning. Your shoulder's been tight since we hauled that timber." He set the wire down by the barn, brushing off his hands. "You watching me that close?" She didn't look up. "I watch what matters." Zane took a step closer. The sky behind him streaked with the softest orange. "You always speak that plain." Delia turned toward him, brushing sweat from her brow with the back of her wrist. "No, but I've lived through enough silence to know when truth's the better offering." He studied her face, and something in him eased. "I've been thinking," he said. "Slow. That land above the creek, it's yours, if you want it." She tilted her head slightly. "And what would you keep?" He glanced toward the cabin, then back to her. "The rest, and maybe a place beside me if you've got use for it." She didn't answer at first. The wind lifted her hair, and she let it fall without fuss. "You're not offering charity," she said softly. "I'm offering a life." Delia stepped toward him, not fast, but sure. The air between them stilled. She reached for his hand, her fingers slipping into his, palm to palm. "Rough meeting, rough. I won't run again," she said. "You don't have to." They stood together under the wide Wyoming sky, the last light folding across their shoulders. No vows were spoken, no grand promises made, just the kind of truth that lives in silence. Earned and understood that night, they sat side by the hearth, her chair pulled close to his. She mended the edge of a curtain with small, steady stitches, and he sanded the handle of a draw knife smooth. The air smelled of pine pitch and warm bread baked that morning. Delia didn't look up when she spoke. "I want to raise chickens again. Not for profit, just for the steadiness of it." Zane set the tool down. "I'll build you a coop." She nodded, eyes on the thread. "And maybe a small fence for a garden? I've got seeds saved from before. I'll dig the trench." She smiled just enough to crease the corner of her cheek. "You always answer like that? No hesitation. I know what I want." She turned to him then, fully, needle resting in her lap. "Then say it." He didn't rush. He reached for her hand, warm beneath his calloused one. "I want this. You and me, a life that doesn't ask for more than what we can give it. Shared work, quiet nights, a roof we both belong to." She looked at him, long and still, and whatever she'd been holding back slipped away. "Then it's yours," she said. "I'm yours," and nothing more needed saying. They were married 2 weeks later, just the two of them, beneath the cottonwood tree by the creek where the water never ran dry. Zane carved 2 rings from shed antler, polished smooth. She wore hers on a leather cord around her neck. He wore his on the smallest finger of his left hand, and never once took it off. That summer, the garden grew in neat rows behind the cabin, the coop filled with hens that clucked like they'd always belonged. Together, they built the lean-to not for storage, but for shade, a place to sit shoulder to shoulder and talk low about what needed tending next. By fall, the corn stood tall, and the harvest came full. Delia canned peaches and beans while Zane stacked wood along the north wall. They moved through their days without rush, without fear, reaching for each other's hands at dusk, sharing silence that didn't need filling. When winter came, it came gentle, not for lack of snow, but because the warmth inside never faltered. They sat close on long nights, her head resting on his shoulder, his thumb tracing the soft curve of her wrist. And though they never spoke the word love as if it didn't need naming, they lived it. In every cup of coffee shared, every quiet glance across a field, every night they chose to fall asleep side by side. Their pasts stayed with them, as all pasts do, but no longer sharp, just softened shapes, worn smooth by time, and steadied by the rhythm of days they had built together. By spring, the last of the snow had melted from the north slope, and the creek tumbled fast over the stones, swollen with melt water. The earth had turned rich and dark again, carrying the scent of pine and promise. Delia stood at the edge of the clearing, sleeves rolled high, skirt pinned at the knees, marking new rows with the same quiet focus as before. Her hands, though roughened by labor, moved with grace, and her face, sunlit and bare, held a stillness that came not from rest, but from belonging. Zane watched her from the cabin steps, arms crossed loosely over his chest, a sack of seed resting beside him. "You've got a straight line," he called out. Delia didn't stop, just smiled faintly and said, "My eye's steadier now." He stepped forward and joined her, kneeling beside the furrow she'd made. "Mind if I walk it with you?" Without looking up, she handed him the stick. "Go ahead. Let's see if you remember how." They worked side by side, falling into rhythm without need for words. Sun climbing higher, their shadows stretching long and lean across the fresh-turned rows. After a while, she asked, "That hollow where the creek bends wide, it holds through spring?" Zane nodded. "Bit of standing water near the low edge, but it drains quick." She kept her eyes on the soil, quiet for a breath. "If I built a lean-to there, I'd need pine. East fence has enough." He paused. "That a plan, or just a thought?" "I don't plan unless I mean it." Zane stood, brushing dirt from his palms. "Then we'll see to it. I've got the tools. The saw's sharp." Delia looked up at him. Then, back at the field they'd just marked. "You'd help me with that." He nodded once. "If you're staying, it's ours to build." She stepped back slowly, letting her gaze sweep over the ridge. The trees, the quiet cabin behind them. "I want to make something that doesn't disappear when the weather turns." He reached for the sack and handed it to her. "Then let's plant." That afternoon, they sowed seed in silence, the kind of silence that hums low with certainty. They moved steady, Delia leaning on the hoe, sweat streaking her brow. Zane pressing seed into soil with his thumb like his father had taught him. Later, they washed up at the creek, kneeling side by side on flat stones, water rushing cold and clean around their hands. Delia cupped the stream, letting it run through her fingers. Her posture eased, not delicate, never that, but unguarded. Zane sat back, watching the play of light in the water. "I never asked," he said, "what you'd have done if I hadn't come along." She let the water fall from her palms. "I'd have kept walking till my legs gave out. Found a tree. Maybe. Tried to wait out the storm. You don't talk like someone who gives up easy." "I don't," she said, but I was close. The wind rustled through the willows, soft, not sharp. Zane reached down, picked a pebble from the riverbed, rubbed it slowly between thumb and finger. "You found something steadier than what you had." Delia turned her head toward him, expression unreadable, voice low. "I think I found someone who hears the quiet things." He looked up, the words catching in his chest. "I never tried to be that." She smiled, not wide, but real. "You didn't have to try." They walked back as the sun began to sink, gold sliding through the cottonwoods. Their steps were slow, measured, not from weariness, but from knowing they didn't need to hurry anymore. Inside, the air smelled of ash and fresh bread. Delia set a warm loaf on the table, tore it in two, and handed him a piece. "You ever think about what comes next?" she asked, still looking at the bread in her hands. Zane didn't hesitate. "I think about what holds, what lasts through the storm." She nodded slowly. "And if something holds, you keep it." Delia looked up at him, her gaze steady. "Then maybe I'll build that lean-to, and maybe I won't leave it behind come winter." Zane met her eyes, calm and clear. "I'd like that." And in that moment, she no longer looked like a woman passing through. She looked like someone who had found the place to begin again. Winter came soft that year, not for lack of snow, but because inside the cabin, The warmth never wavered. The fire burned low and steady, and their days fell into rhythm, quiet, ordinary, shared. And yet, even as the world stilled around them, something restless stirred beneath Delia's calm. She moved through the days like she belonged planting, baking, fixing tack beside Zane in silence that no longer held tension. But at night, when the light faded and the hush returned, she sometimes stared at the ceiling too long, or stood too long at the porch rail, watching the dark hills like they might reach for her. One morning, Zane found her sitting at the table before sunrise, a half-mended shirt in her lap, untouched, her shoulders drawn. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, setting his gloves near the stove. She didn't look at him. "Sometimes I wake up, afraid it's all gone, like I dreamed the fire, the bread, the quiet." Zane crossed the room slowly, then paused. "And is it still here? When you wake?" "Yes," she said, "but I don't trust it yet." He pulled out the chair across from her, sat with his arms resting on his knees. "You ever think about leaving?" She didn't answer right away. The only sound was the soft crackle of wood settling in the hearth. "I think about how easily it could all disappear," she said. "Storm, sickness, a letter from a bank," her voice caught. "I built so much before. I thought it would hold, but it didn't." Zane leaned forward, voice low. "I'm not promising nothing will go wrong. But this place, we're not building it on fear." Delia looked at him, eyes filled with things too old for her face. "I want to stay. I do. But sometimes I feel like if I lean on it too hard, it'll break." "Then lean soft," he said gently. "But lean." She blinked, and something in her loosened. Later that week, a storm rolled in, not violent, but cold and wide. Delia stood at the window, watching snow curl across the field. The lean-to they'd built together stood firm, roof heavy with white. Zane sat behind her at the table, sharpening a blade in slow, even strokes. "I used to run from storms," she said without turning. "Pack a bag, count food, watch the door. And now," she breathed in deep, "now I think about baking." Zane smiled. "That's progress." Delia turned slightly, her hands loose at her sides. "Do you ever worry I'll leave anyway?" He set the knife down, met her gaze. "No." "Why not?" "Because you're still here, and every day you stay is louder than the fear you'll go." She didn't move at first. Then, slowly, she crossed the room and sat beside him. Her shoulder touched his. Her hand, worn and warm, slipped into his, and that was enough. That night, the wind clawed at the windows, but the fire never flickered. They sat close, her head against his chest, his arm wrapped around her shoulders, and the silence between them wasn't made of doubt anymore. It was something solid, something settled. Spring returned with a hush. The frost melted from the eaves, dripping slow into dark earth. The creek below their land swelled again, not in fury but with life. Snow gave way to shoots of green, and the wind no longer warned of anything. It only whispered. Delia stood in the garden plot near the cabin, raking through soft soil. Her hair was tied back, sleeves rolled, the hem of her skirt dark with dust. Her hands, once trembling, now moved with quiet certainty. She didn't look like someone surviving anymore. She looked like someone choosing. Zane came up from the pasture, fence wire slung over his shoulder. He paused for a moment, just watching her, how she moved, how the earth followed her lead. "I walk the east fence," he called. "It's holding steady." She looked up, smiled. "I boiled willow bark this morning. Thought your shoulder might ache after hauling timber yesterday." He grinned. "You still watching me that close?" "I watch what matters." The light behind him was soft, brushing gold across the hills. He stepped closer, slow, steady. "I've been thinking," he said. "That land above the creek, if you still want it, it's yours." Delia tilted her head. "And what would you keep?" He glanced at the cabin, then back to her. "The rest, and maybe a place beside me if you've got use for it." She didn't answer right away. The wind lifted her braid and let it fall. "You're not offering charity. I'm offering a life." She reached out then, took his hand. "I didn't come looking for one," she said softly. "But I found it." "Didn't I?" "You did." Her fingers tightened around his. "I won't run again. You don't have to." They stood together beneath the Wyoming sky, where once there had only been storm and wind. Now there was quiet, and what had started as shelter had become something steadier than either of them expected. That night, they sat by the hearth, chairs pulled close, a loaf of bread cooling between them. She mended a torn curtain. He carved a new handle for her hoe. No grand words, no ceremonies, just the kind of life you grow from the ground up. "I want chickens," Delia said suddenly, not looking up, not for selling, just for the steadiness of it. Zane didn't miss a beat. "I'll build you a coop, and maybe a garden fence. I've got lumber set aside." She smiled, barely, but it was real. "You always answer like that, like you already knew." He looked at her, hands stilling on the wood. "I know what I want." She finally looked up. "Then say it." "I want this," he said. "You and me. A life made of simple things that don't ask more than we can give. A roof we both belong to. Quiet days, steady work, and a future we don't have to chase, just live." Delia let the thread fall into her lap, and for the first time, she let herself believe it. "Then it's yours," she whispered. "I'm yours." 2 weeks later, they stood beneath the cottonwood by the creek, just the two of them, and said nothing. There were no vows, just the wind through the branches, and the sound of water that never stopped running. Zane carved rings from antlers, smooth, warm, strong. She wore hers on a leather cord around her neck. He wore his on his smallest finger. Neither ever took them off. Through summer, the garden bloomed, the coop filled with hens. The lean-to they built together became their favorite place to rest in the heat, backs to the logs, talking low about what needed tending next. By fall, the corn was high, the woodpile full, and the silence they shared was no longer something that separated them. It was the space they'd filled with trust. When winter returned, it came without fear, because what they had made held, not because it was perfect, but because it was theirs. And in that quiet corner of Wyoming, where the wind once howled and now only whispered, Zane and Delia lived out their days in peace, side by side, never once alone again.